The massive council chamber buzzed with nervous whispers as beings from dozens of different worlds gathered around the holographic display. In the center of the room, a three-dimensional image showed the Zilani homeworld surrounded by dark, menacing ships like predators circling wounded prey. Ambassador Kalani stood at the podium, her blue-scaled hands trembling as she gripped the edges. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and incredible artistic abilities. They had never built warships, never trained soldiers, never even considered that someone might want to destroy their beautiful world. Honorable Council members, Kalani began, her voice breaking with emotion. This is our final transmission before communications are completely cut off. The Vorthok Empire has surrounded our planet with over 4,000 warships. They've destroyed our space stations, our orbital farms, and yesterday, they shot down our medical supply ships. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the usually chattering Alteron delegates stopped their whispered conversations. Everyone knew what the Vorthok Empire was capable of. They had conquered 17 worlds in the past decade, each time demanding complete surrender before unleashing devastating attacks on civilian populations. 3 months ago, Kalani continued, tears now flowing freely down her face. We thought this was just a misunderstanding. The Vorthok said they wanted to discuss trade agreements. When their fleet arrived, we welcomed them with festivals and celebrations. We prepared our finest art exhibitions and musical performances. She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. Instead of attending our cultural events, they surrounded our world and began their siege. They demanded we surrender our government, our resources, and our freedom. When we tried to negotiate, they said we had 24 hours to comply or they would begin destroying our cities. Elder Morvain, a massive whale-like creature who represented the Cetacean Union, shifted uncomfortably in his specialized water tank. His deep voice rumbled through the translation speakers. Ambassador Kalani, surely there must be some diplomatic solution. The Vorthok Empire has shown willingness to negotiate in the past. Kalani's expression turned to despair. Honored Elder, we sent our best diplomats yesterday under a flag of truce. The Vorthok commander had them executed on live broadcast to our planet as an example. They said any further attempts at negotiation would result in the immediate bombing of our largest city. The Alteron representative, a tall, insect-like being with 4 arms, clicked his mandibles nervously. The harsh reality is that our combined military forces number only about 2,000 ships. Intelligence reports confirm the Vorthok have brought 4,000 vessels to Zilani space. Even if we mobilized every warship in Council space, we would be outnumbered 2-1. And that assumes all Council members would vote to risk war with the Empire? Added the representative from the Silicon Collective, her crystalline form flickering with worried light patterns. Many of our worlds have trade agreements with the Vorthok. Military action could result in economic retaliation against our own planets. Elder Morvain nodded his massive head slowly. Perhaps we could arrange some form of compensation for the Empire. The Cetacean Union has valuable deep space mining rights we could offer in exchange for Zilani independence. With respect, honored. Elder Ambassador Kalani said, her voice now filled with desperation. The Vorthok commander made it clear that they want complete control of our world and our people. They are not interested in trade or compensation. They want to add another conquered species to their empire. The chamber erupted in worried conversations as representatives realized the gravity of the situation. Some suggested economic sanctions. Others proposed sending formal protests to the Vorthok government. A few mentioned the possibility of offering the Zilani people refuge on other worlds, essentially abandoning their planet to the invaders. In the back corner of the chamber, Commander Jake Morrison had been listening quietly. The humans had only been members of the Galactic Council for 6 months. Ever since long-range scouts had discovered Earth and made first contact, most council members still viewed humans as primitive newcomers from a world so dangerous that it was classified as barely habitable. Jake stood up slowly, his movement catching the attention of nearby delegates. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent years in space. His simple uniform stood out among the elaborate ceremonial robes worn by most other representatives. The Republic of Earth will respond to Ambassador Kalani's distress call, he announced, in a clear, steady voice. The entire chamber fell silent. Hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the human representative. Many delegates had forgotten that Earth even had a representative present. Since humans rarely spoke during council sessions, Elder Morvain leaned forward in his tank, his massive form creating waves in the water. Commander Morrison, we certainly appreciate Earth's willingness to help. However, given the limited size of your fleet, perhaps it would be better if human forces remained in a support role. Remained completely neutral. The other delegates assumed he was calculating the impossible odds. Realizing that his species was too new to space travel to make any meaningful difference against the Vorthok Empire, I need to contact Fleet Command for specific instructions. Jake replied calmly, I'll return shortly with Earth's official response. As Jake left the chamber, conversations resumed with many delegates expressing sympathy for human eagerness to help while acknowledging the futility of the gesture. The general consensus was that Earth might be able to contribute a few dozen ships at most. Jake returned exactly 1 hour later. He walked directly to the center of the chamber, where Ambassador Kalani still stood beside the holographic display of her besieged homeworld. The chamber quieted as Jake activated his personal communicator and spoke into it clearly. This is Commander Morrison. Please broadcast Earth's official response. His voice carried throughout the chamber as he delivered humanity's message in 3 simple words that would echo through galactic history. We're coming. The Kepler system had been chosen as the rally point because it was empty, just a dying red star with a few barren rocks orbiting around it. Council observers positioned their monitoring stations at what they thought was a safe distance, expecting to watch maybe 50 human ships arrive over the next week. They were completely wrong. Exactly 72 hours after Commander Jake Morrison had delivered Earth's response, space began to ripple with incoming hyperspace jumps. The first wave materialized in perfect formation, 300 sleek warships arranged in attack patterns that made the alien observers gasp. These weren't the crude, primitive vessels they had expected from a newly discovered world. Admiral Tom Bradley's flagship, the UES Determination, was a massive dreadnought that dwarfed most ships in the Galactic Council fleet. Its hull bore the scars of previous battles, and weapon ports lined its sides like the teeth of some ancient predator. The Admiral himself appeared on the communication screens, a grizzled veteran with steel-gray eyes and the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of combat experience. Admiral Bradley to Council observers, his voice crackled through the communication system. First wave has arrived and established perimeter, preparing to receive additional forces. Before the alien observers could respond, another massive hyperspace distortion announced the arrival of 500 more ships. Captain Lisa Morgan's Colonial Defense Force brought vessels that looked different from Bradley's military fleet. These ships were built for protecting frontier worlds, with heavier armor and more defensive systems. They took up positions around the military vessels like a protective shell. The Altaran observer, a nervous insect-like being named Clixus, frantically worked his instruments. 800 ships in less than 6 hours, he chittered to his companions. This is more than we expected from the entire human species. But the arrivals weren't finished. Commander Mike Torres brought something that shocked the observers. Even more civilian ships that had been turned into weapons of war. Massive cargo haulers now sported missile launchers welded to their hulls. Passenger liners had been converted into fighter carriers, their luxury cabins replaced with launch bays. Mining ships bristled with improvised weapons, their industrial cutting lasers repurposed for combat. By the void, whispered the Silicon Collective observer. Her crystalline form flickering with amazement, they've militarized their entire civilian fleet. Elder Morvain, monitoring from his command ship, opened a direct channel to Admiral Bradley. The massive, whale-like alien's voice carried a mixture of admiration and concern. Admiral, this is truly impressive. Nearly 1,000 ships in such a short time. However, intelligence reports still show the Vorthok have 4,000 vessels. You're still outnumbered 4-1. Admiral Bradley's response carried a tone that made the alien observers shiver, not from fear, but from the quiet intensity. In his voice, Elder Morvain, what you're seeing right now are just the early arrivals. The ships that were closest to the rally point when we got the call, give us another day. The alien observers thought he was bluffing. No single planet could possibly field more than 1,000 combat-ready vessels. Even the most militaristic species in the galaxy required multiple worlds to support large fleets. They stopped thinking that. When the sun rose over their monitoring station, all through the night, ships had continued arriving. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. The empty Kepler system was now filled with more military hardware than most galactic wars had ever seen. Massive dreadnoughts appeared alongside converted research vessels. Hospital ships arrived carrying medical supplies and emergency surgical suites. Even university vessels had been pressed into service. Their laboratories converted into command centers and their student housing turned into barracks for Marine units. Captain Rachel Davis commanded one of the most unusual ships in the growing fleet, the USS Discovery, originally a deep space research vessel now bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. She opened a channel to the increasingly panicked Council observers. "This is your first time watching humanity mobilize for war, isn't it?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and grim determination. The Alteron observer could barely speak. His instruments had long since given up trying to count the arriving ships. "Captain Davis, our sensors are overwhelmed. How many vessels does your species possess?" Admiral Bradley's voice cut into the conversation, answering the question that was on every alien mind. On Earth itself, not nearly enough. That's why we're bringing the colonial defense fleets from every human world, the mining consortiums from the asteroid belts, the merchant marine from the trade routes, the exploration fleets from the outer systems. Anyone who can hold a weapon and has a ship to carry them. The truth was becoming clear to the alien observers. Humanity hadn't just built a military, they had built a society where every citizen could become a soldier, every ship could become a weapon, and every world could contribute to the defense of others. Their industrial capacity wasn't limited to military shipyards. Every civilian construction facility, every mining operation, every research station could be converted to support the war effort. As the second day dawned, Commander Jake Morrison transmitted the final count to the stunned Galactic Council. His voice carried across space to every world in Council territory, and his words would be remembered for generations. Council members, this is Commander Morrison with Earth's official fleet count. We have 12,473 combat-ready vessels assembled and ready for deployment. Additional ships are still arriving from the outer colonies. Earth has answered the call for help.
Wow.
The silence that followed was deafening.
Damn.
In less than 4 days, humanity had assembled the largest military force in recorded galactic history. And they had done it not for conquest, not for territorial expansion, but to save a species of peaceful artists that most humans had never even heard of before. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant when Earth went to war. The edge of the Zilani system erupted in brilliant flashes of light as thousands of ships dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously. The precision was breathtaking. Each vessel appeared exactly where it was supposed to be, forming attack formations that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. For the Vorthok forces that had been leisurely blockading the peaceful Zilani homeworld for months, it was like watching their worst nightmare come to life. Admiral Tom Bradley stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays update in real time. His weathered face remained calm, but his eyes held the cold intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and combat experience. "Communications open. A channel on all frequencies," Bradley ordered. "Make sure everyone in this system can hear what we're about to say." Lieutenant Ben Cooper, barely 25, but already a veteran of 3 border conflicts, nodded and activated the transmitters. "Channel open, Admiral. Broadcasting on all military and civilian frequencies." The lead elements of the human fleet, what appeared to be about 2,000 ships, moved into position facing the Vorthok siege fleet. To anyone watching, it looked like a brave but foolish gesture. The Vorthok had more than 4,000 vessels surrounding the Zilani world, and their ships were larger and more heavily armed than most galactic standard designs. The response from the Vorthok came immediately. Fleet Commander Dracoses, a veteran of dozens of successful conquests, appeared on the communication screens. His reptilian features were twisted in what might have been amusement. The Vorthok were known throughout the galaxy for their arrogance and their complete contempt for what they considered inferior species. Human vessels, Dracoses hissed through the translation software. You are either very brave or very stupid. My fleet numbers over 4,000 ships. You have barely 2,000. Simple mathematics should tell you that withdrawal is your only option if you wish to leave this system with your lives intact. Admiral Bradley's response was delivered in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. Commander Dracoses, you are currently blockading a world full of innocent civilians who have never threatened you or your empire. You have executed diplomatic envoys under a flag of truce. I am ordering you to stand down your siege and withdraw your forces immediately. The silence that followed was broken by what could only be described as Vorthok laughter, a sound like grinding metal that made everyone on the human bridge wince. Impossible, human. Do you know who you are speaking to? I am Fleet Commander Dracoses of the Vorthok Empire. I have crushed civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia before your species even discovered fire. I have personally overseen the conquest of 17 worlds. Fleets twice your size have surrendered rather than face my forces in battle. Admiral Bradley turned slightly toward his communications officer, and Lieutenant Cooper caught the subtle nod. His fingers flew over his console, transmitting a coded message that had been prepared days earlier. The message went out on tightly focused beams to specific coordinates throughout the Zilani system, coordinates that appeared to be empty space. Commander Dracoses, Admiral Bradley said, his voice still maddeningly calm, you should have done more research about humans before you decided to threaten innocent people in our presence. Across the system, space began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The effects started small, just a few distortions here and there that could have been sensor glitches. But within seconds, it became clear that something extraordinary was happening. Captain Emily Watson was the first to decloak her stealth group. 800 ships materialized out of nothing behind the Vorthok left flank. Their weapon systems already powered and targeting solutions locked. Watson, a former test pilot who had helped develop humanity's advanced stealth technology, opened her own communication channel. Vorthok vessels. This is Captain Watson of the Human Stealth Force. You are now surrounded. Any attempt to fire on civilian targets will result in immediate retaliation. Before Commander Dracoses could respond, Commander David Lee's task force appeared on the opposite side of the Vorthok formation, another 1,000 vessels. These ones massive dreadnoughts and heavy cruisers that had been hiding in the asteroid belt for over a day. Their sudden appearance sent shock waves through the Vorthok fleet as commanders realized they had been outmaneuvered by what they had assumed was a primitive species. But the surprises weren't over. Captain Jennifer Hayes brought her heavy assault group up from below the orbital plane, rising from behind the shadow of Zilani's largest moon, like some ancient sea monster emerging from the depths. Her ships were the biggest and most heavily armed in the human fleet, vessels designed not just to win battles, but to end wars. The decloaking continued for a full 10 minutes. Ships appeared from behind asteroids where they had been powered, down and drifting like space debris. More vessels rose from the outer planets where they had been hiding in the shadows of gas giants. Some had been concealed in the comet fields at the edge of the system, their heat signatures masked by the natural ice and rock around them. Each new group of ships that appeared sent another wave of panic through the Vorthok fleet. Their sensors, designed to detect known galactic ship designs, had been completely fooled by human stealth technology. Commanders who had been confidently planning the final assault on Zilani suddenly found themselves surrounded by an enemy that had appeared from nowhere. Commander Dracoses' voice came over the communication system again. But all trace of arrogance was gone. This is impossible. Our intelligence networks are the best in the galaxy. A report said you had barely 1,000 ships total in your entire fleet. Admiral Bradley's response was heard not just in the Zilani system, but on every Galactic Council monitoring station and news network across known space. His words would be quoted in military academies and diplomatic negotiations for centuries to come. Commander Dracoses, what you are looking at, is the result of exactly 3 days of human mobilization. We have been a spacefaring species for barely a century. We are still learning how to build proper warships and establish colonies. And yet, in less than 72 hours, we can put 12,000 combat-ready vessels in any system we choose. To defend, he paused, letting that sink in. I want you to think about something, Commander. What do you think we will be capable of fielding in another 100 years? The tactical displays throughout the system updated simultaneously, showing the final count that made even seasoned Vorthok veterans gasp in disbelief. 11,847 human vessels had the Vorthok fleet completely surrounded. The 4,200 ships that Commander Dracos had thought made him invincible were now outnumbered nearly 3-1. Admiral Bradley's final words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Commander Dracos, you now have exactly 30 seconds to begin withdrawing your forces from Zelani's space. If you refuse, we will demonstrate why the rest of the galaxy has classified Earth as a Class 12 death world. The countdown had begun. The 30 seconds of silence stretched like an eternity across the Zelani system. Every ship, every crew member, every alien observer held their breath, waiting to see what Commander Dracos would choose. Deep down, Admiral Bradley already knew the answer. The Vorthok Empire had built its reputation on crushing weaker opponents, and their pride would never allow them to back down from what they still believed were primitive newcomers to the galaxy. The first Vorthok plasma cannon fired. At exactly 31 seconds, the blast struck Captain Mark Turner's destroyer, the EU's Defiant, directly amidships. The ship's shields flared brilliant blue before collapsing entirely, and atmosphere began venting from multiple hull breaches. On any other day, with any other fleet, Turner would have ordered his crew to abandon ship and retreat to a safe distance. Instead, Turner's voice came over the battlecommunicationsnetwork.com and determined despite alarms blaring in the background. All hands, this is the captain. We've taken critical damage, but our engines are still functional. Set course directly for that Vorthok battlecruiser, ramming speed. The alien observers watching from their monitoring stations couldn't believe what they were seeing. The damaged human destroyer, trailing debris and leaking plasma, accelerated directly toward the massive Vorthok ship that had just crippled it. Turner's crew didn't evacuate. They didn't request assistance. They turned their dying ship into a guided missile weighing 50,000 tons. The impact was devastating. Both vessels disappeared in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space like a newborn star. The shockwave rocked nearby ships and sent debris flying in all directions. Lieutenant Amy Brooks, leading a squadron of human fighters, watched her friend's sacrifice with tears in her eyes. Her voice crackled over the radio, filled with grief. And rage Turner's down, but he took that bastard with him. All fighters were avenging him right now. Small craft dove toward the Vorthok formation like angry hornets, their weapons blazing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with the fury of people who had just watched their comrades die, protecting strangers. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The human fleet didn't follow any conventional battle doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation and trading shots at long range, they closed a point-blank distance and began what could only be described as organized chaos. Captain James Wilson's heavy cruiser, the UES Courage, took a direct hit from a Vorthok dreadnought that knocked out its main weapons and crippled its navigation systems. Any reasonable commander would have ordered retreat or surrender. Wilson looked at the damage reports, looked at his crew, and made a different choice. Engineering, give me everything the engines have got. Helm, set collision course with that dreadnought. All hands, brace for impact. The massive cruiser, smoke, pouring from its wounds, turned directly toward the Vorthok ship that had damaged it. The aliens watched in horror as Wilson's vessel slammed into the enemy dreadnought at full speed. Both ships were destroyed instantly. But the explosion tore a gap in the Vorthok battle line. Captain Maria Rodriguez didn't hesitate. She led her assault group directly through the gap that Wilson's sacrifice had created, her ships pouring devastating fire into the exposed Vorthok vessels. Wilson opened the door. She transmitted to her captains. Now we kick it down. Commander Paul Anderson was coordinating his squadron when he saw another friend's ship explode. Lieutenant Commander Martinez had tried the same ramming tactic, but his smaller vessel had taken 3 Vorthok ships with it when its reactor overloaded. Anderson's voice carried across the battle network, grim but determined. Martinez is gone, but he took 3 of theirs with him. All ships follow his example. Ross, Williams, you're with me? We're going to show these bullies what happens when you threaten innocent people. Is a Vorthok fleet, accustomed to fighting civilized opponents who valued their own lives above all else, had never faced anything like this before. Human ships that suffered critical damage didn't retreat or surrender. They accelerated toward the nearest enemy vessel and used their death as a weapon. Crews with failing life support systems didn't evacuate. They stayed at their posts, jury-rigging their nuclear reactors to overload and take enemy ships with them when they died. Admiral Bradley watched the chaos unfold on his tactical displays, coordinating the battle with the cold precision of a chess master. His voice cut through the noise of combat, directing his forces with surgical accuracy. Anderson, take your squadron through the gap Wilson created. Davis, I need your converted science ships to target their command vessels. Forget everything you learned in the academy about proper engagement distances. Get close and hit them where it hurts. Captain Rachel Davis, commanding the research vessel, turned warship U.S. Discovery, acknowledged the order. Her ship had been built to study distant stars and alien cultures, not fight battles. But her crew had spent 3 days welding weapons to their hull and training for this moment. Copy that, Admiral. Science team, you wanted to study alien technology up close? Today's your chance. Target their flagship. Admiral Bradley's next order sent a chill through everyone who heard it. Hayes, begin the Thermopylae maneuver. Captain. Jennifer Hayes commanded the heaviest assault ships in the human fleet. She acknowledged the order with grim understanding. The Thermopylae maneuver was named after an ancient Earth battle where 300 warriors held off an entire army by sacrificing themselves. In space combat, it meant one unit would deliberately sacrifice itself to ensure victory for the whole fleet. Understood, Admiral. Heavy assault group, you know what this means? We're going to take their center and hold it, no matter what. 4. The Zilani, and for everyone watching who thinks Earth doesn't keep its promises, the battle raged for 4 hours. Human ships fought with a ferocity that shocked every observer. When their weapons failed, they rammed enemy vessels. When their hulls were breached, they kept fighting until their life support gave out. When their reactors were damaged, they turned them into bombs that could destroy entire enemy squadrons. Vorthok had superior individual ships and better weapons technology. But they had never faced an enemy that treated death in battle not as a failure, but as just another weapon to be used against their opponents. Their crews began to panic as they realized that damaging a human ship didn't stop it, it just made it more dangerous. By the end of the 4th hour, the once mighty Vorthok siege fleet was in full retreat. Of their original 4,200 ships, fewer than 800 remained combat-capable. The rest had been destroyed or so badly damaged that they could barely maintain life support. The human fleet had paid a terrible price. Nearly 2,000 ships had been lost, and thousands of brave men and women had died far from home defending people they had never met. But they had achieved something that would echo through galactic history. Admiral Bradley's final transmission was broadcast across the entire galaxy, carried by news networks to every civilized world. His words would be remembered long after the last veteran of the battle had died. Attention, Vorthok Empire. Tell your leaders what you learned here today. Tell them that humanity remembers its friends, and humanity keeps its promises. And tell them that the next time they threaten innocent people, Earth will be watching. The galaxy had learned what it meant when humans went to war. The cleanup after the battle was almost as impressive as the battle itself. Within hours of the last Vorthok ship fleeing the system, human engineering vessels were already moving toward the damaged Zilani orbital stations. Massive constructor. Ships that had been converted from civilian designs began extending repair arms and deploying work crews. Medical ships docked with Zilani facilities to treat the wounded, while supply vessels delivered food and essential materials that had been cut off during the 3-month siege. But what truly amazed the alien observers was how quickly the human fleet began to disperse. Ships that had traveled across half the galaxy to answer a distress call were already receiving new orders and preparing to depart. The massive armada that had shocked the Vorthok Empire was dissolving as rapidly as it had formed. Ambassador Kalani stood on the observation deck of Admiral Bradley's flagship, watching the controlled chaos of departure preparations. Her people were safe, their world was free, but she couldn't stop the tears flowing down her blue-scaled cheeks. The weight of what had just happened, what these strangers had sacrificed for her people, was almost too much to bear. "Admiral Bradley," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "how can my people ever repay what you have done for us? Thousands of your warriors died protecting people they had never even met. They gave their lives for complete strangers who couldn't offer them anything in return." Admiral Bradley stood beside her, looking out at the orbital stations where Zilani workers were already beginning repairs with human assistance. His weathered face showed the exhaustion of 4 days without sleep, but his eyes were calm and peaceful. "Ambassador Kalani, there is no debt between us, no payment required, no favors owed." He turned to face her directly. "When someone calls for help, you answer that call. When innocent people are in danger, you protect them. When bullies threaten the weak, you stand up to them. That's not something we do for reward or recognition. That's just what it means to be human." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any grand speech about duty or honor. These people had risked everything, lost thousands of their own, and completely changed the balance of galactic power. And to them, it was just the natural thing to do when someone needed help. News of the Battle of Zilani spread across the galaxy faster than even hyperspace communication networks could carry it. Within days, every civilized world had heard the story of how a single species had mobilized 12,000 warships in 72 hours to save strangers. Military analysts were frantically revising their estimates of human industrial capacity. Diplomats were reconsidering their positions on dozens of pending issues. And species that had been bullying their weaker neighbors suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session just 5 days after the battle. The great chamber that had echoed with helpless debate during the crisis was now filled with urgent whispers and nervous energy. Representatives who had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers now watched their every move with fascination and concern. Elder Morvain, his massive form shifting restlessly in his water tank, addressed the assembly with something close to awe in his voice. "Honored colleagues, we have just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. In 72 hours, single species from a single world mobilized more military force than our combined civilizations have ever possessed. They used that power not for conquest or territorial expansion, but to save a people they barely knew. Then they left without demanding payment, territory, or political concessions." The Silicon Collective representative, her crystalline form flickering with complex light patterns, added her analysis. "Our preliminary calculations indicate that human industrial capacity exceeds our previous estimates by at least 3 orders of magnitude. If they can field 12,000 combat vessels as a rapid response force, their total military potential may be effectively unlimited." The Alteron observer Clixis was more direct. Insect-like features twitched nervously as he delivered. His assessment: the balance of galactic power has shifted permanently. Earth can field more ships than the rest of us combined. The question we must ask ourselves is, what are we going to do about it? Commander Jake Morrison had been sitting quietly in the back of the chamber, just as he had during that first desperate plea for help. Now he stood up slowly, and the entire assembly fell silent. Every representative remembered his simple words from days earlier. "We're coming. All of us." The human fleet has completed its mission and returned to normal operations, Jake announced in the same calm tone he had used before. "Our forces are back to patrolling human space, protecting our colonies, and conducting routine training exercises." Paused, looking around the chamber at faces that now showed respect instead of dismissive tolerance. "But I want every species in this chamber to understand something important. Earth remembers who answered the call for help when innocent people were being threatened. Earth remembers who offered assistance, who provided intelligence, who opened their space lanes to our ships. His voice grew harder, and several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Earth also remembers who chose to do nothing, who suggested negotiation while civilians were being executed, who worried more about trade agreements than about genocide. Jake walked toward the center of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. The next time someone broadcasts a distress call, asking for help against oppression, I suggest you choose your response very carefully, because if you won't answer that call, Earth will. And we will remember who stood with the innocent and who stood aside. He headed toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one final time. We joined this council hoping to learn from older, wiser civilizations. Instead, we've learned that sometimes the youngest voice in the room is the only one willing to do what's right. Think about that the next time you debate whether saving lives is worth the inconvenience. As Jake Morrison left the chamber, the assembled representatives sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed something that would reshape galactic civilization forever. Not just the raw display of human military power, but something far more significant. The willingness to use that power for others rather than themselves. In the days and weeks that followed, the effects rippled outward. Aggressive species reconsidered their expansion plans. Oppressed peoples began broadcasting their own distress calls, hoping Earth might answer. Trade routes shifted as species tried to align themselves with humanity's new position, but perhaps most importantly, a few brave representatives from other species began asking themselves a difficult question. If a species barely a century old could mobilize everything they had to save strangers, what did that say about the rest of them? The galaxy would never be the same. And deep down, most of its inhabitants knew that was probably a good thing.